the inmate who outsmarted 42 guards and walked out of an American supermax prison. Subscribe now, unless you're afraid of discovering what a single man with patience, intelligence, and zero fear can really do. The night Richard Lee McNair vanished from inside one of America's most secure federal prisons didn't begin with alarms or panic. It began with silence, the kind that settles over a place so heavily guarded, so tightly controlled, that escape feels physically impossible. By sunrise, that silence had turned into national chaos. 42 trained officers had watched over him. Cameras monitored the hallways. Metal detectors guarded every exit. And yet, somehow, the inmate everyone believed to be securely locked inside had slipped out, unnoticed, as if the walls themselves had opened for him. Hours earlier, in the warm fluorescent glow of the prison's industrial workshop, McNair was just another inmate completing another shift. That was how he wanted it. He'd learned early that the easiest way to fool a system wasn't to fight it. It was to blend into it so well that no one even thinks to question you. He moved with quiet precision, acting bored, tired, predictable. But behind that calm expression was a mind constantly scanning, measuring, planning. Over the years, he had observed every guard rotation, every shift change, every delay, every small human weakness that could be turned into a weapon of opportunity. That afternoon, no one noticed his eyes lingering a bit too long on the stacks of outgoing mail pallets. To others, they were just piles of boxes and bags, wrapped in layers of industrial plastic and tape. To him, they were a flaw. The mail area was busy, chaotic, and, most importantly, trusted. It was one of the only places where outside trucks came in and out of the facility multiple times a week. Guards checked the pallets for contraband, but no, at every inch. Not every gap, and definitely not the inside of a pallet once it had been sealed. McNair had spent months building a relationship with the environment, memorizing where the cameras didn't angle perfectly, studying the rhythm of the mailroom workers, and learning which guards chatted too much and which ones rushed their inspections. He knew the exact hour when the workload was highest, when guards were distracted and stressed. That was when mistakes were most likely to happen, and he was counting on one mistake, just one. Late in the afternoon, as the last of the mail was being processed, he quietly slipped into the packaging area and began executing a plan he had rehearsed mentally hundreds of times. He had constructed a chamber inside a pallet, a narrow, suffocating space created by shifting mailbags and creating a hollow cavity just large enough for his body. He wrapped the outer layer neatly, using the same tape, the same knots, the same materials the workers used. By the time he climbed inside, the pallet looked identical to every other one in the room. Then he waited, the seconds stretching to minutes, the minutes to an hour. When guards arrived to move the pallets, his heart slammed against his ribs, but he remained completely still. To them, it was just another sealed shipment. They checked the exterior, they documented the location, and they wheeled it out the door without ever noticing the living, breathing man hiding inside. Outside the workshop, the sun was already dipping toward the horizon. The prison yard was bathed in fading gold, the kind of light that makes the world feel calm and slow. No one realized an inmate was about to roll past the final checkpoint without handcuffs, without a file, without even a glance. As the pallet cracked over uneven concrete, he kept his breath shallow, praying the sounds of plastic shifting wooden to be heard. All it would take was one officer with a curious instinct, one dog barking at the wrong moment, one misstep. But the truck doors closed. The engine fired up. And with that, he was gone. Inside the prison, dinner was being served. Head counts were happening. Life continued as if nothing had happened. 2 hours later, the truck arrived at a warehouse outside the prison grounds. Workers began unloading pallets as usual. One of them paused when he noticed slight movement inside a bundle. Nothing dramatic, just a shift, something that could have been settling weight. Before he could investigate, a man emerged from the side of the pallet like a ghost stepping out of a wall. Dusty, sweating, but calm. Almost too calm. "What are you?" the worker began. "Just inspecting something," McNair replied with a casual confidence that made the worker freeze. There was no panic, no aggression, no sign of threat. Just a man who looked like he knew exactly where he was supposed to be. And in a place where workers saw dozens of drivers, inspectors, and logistics staff weekly, confidence was convincing. Minutes later, McNair was walking down an empty road, breathing fresh, free air for the first time in years. Back inside the prison, the first sign that something was wrong came during a routine count. A guard frowned, counted again, asked another officer to verify, then a third. Suddenly, radios crackled. Officers rushed through corridors. Supervisors barked commands. The quiet shift shattered into chaos. An inmate was missing. Not missing from the yard, not missing from a work assignment. Missing from the prison entirely. What stunned investigators was how clean the escape was. There were no broken locks, no tampered cameras, no signs of struggle. It didn't look like an escape. It looked like a clerical error. But when they found the hollow pallet, perfectly taped, perfectly sealed, the truth hit them like a punch. He had walked out right under their noses. And then came the call from a small-town police department miles away. A patrol officer had encountered a suspicious man jogging near a set of railroad tracks. The officer had spoken to him, collected his details, even questioned him. The man had smiled, joked, and explained he was just out for morning exercise. The officer had let him go. Only later, after the escape notice went out, did the officer realize the truth. He had come face to face with Richard Lee McNair and never knew it. But the real shock wasn't that McNair had escaped. It was what investigators found the next morning, hidden in a corner of the workshop, something that made them question whether this escape had been planned far longer, far deeper than they ever imagined. By the time dawn broke over the prison walls, the escape was no longer a rumor whispered between guards. It was an emergency, a failure, a crisis that demanded explanations no one had. Supervisors barked orders into radios, officers ran from wing to wing, and commanders stood in tight circles reviewing head counts again and again, as if repeating them would magically make the missing inmate reappear. But even with the alarms blaring and officers turning every room upside down, there was something even more unsettling. The object discovered in the corner of the workshop. Tucked behind crates, half hidden beneath fabric scraps, was a notebook. It was small, covered in dust, and filled with neat, tiny handwriting. Someone had been documenting routines, guard rotations, shift delays, the times when pallets were loaded, when they were sealed, when they left the building, and when trucks departed the prison grounds. Every line was precise, every detail exact. To investigators, it was clear. McNair hadn't just escaped, he had studied them for months. Agents from the FBI were rushed to the facility, their faces hard, their questions sharp. How did a man under near constant supervision manage to observe enough to execute such a flawless plan? How did no one notice he was gone until hours later? And the biggest question of all, how far could he get before the country realized he was already a step ahead? Outside the prison, news crews camped at the gates. Helicopters circled overhead. And in every briefing room, maps were rolled out, lines drawn, and counties highlighted. The manhunt began before noon, but investigators already feared the truth. McNair had too much time, too much distance, too much talent for disappearing. While the first day of the search gained momentum, McNair was already deep in the countryside, moving with a calmness that seemed almost impossible for a man who had just broken out of a federal facility. He traveled on foot, sticking to empty service roads, using abandoned tracks, slipping between stretches of farmland and wooded areas. His pace wasn't frantic. It was measured, controlled, as if he'd prepared for this moment long before it came. And in a sense, he had. Hours into his hike, as the sun climbed higher and the roads grew hotter, the rumble of a vehicle approached behind him. A police cruiser. McNair slowed, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and reminded himself of the first rule he had always lived by. Panic attracts attention. Calmness hides the truth. The cruiser eased to a stop beside him. The window rolled down. "Hey there," the officer said. "Everything all right?" McNair smiled, the kind of smile that disarms before it's even fully formed. "Morning, officer. Just out for a run." The officer raised an eyebrow. "You out here alone?" "Yeah," McNair replied. "Just keeping in shape. I'm staying at a place a few miles up. Beautiful day, right?" The officer considered him. McNair's shirt was damp from sweat, but there was no sign of panic. No hurried breathing. No trembling hands. Just the calm, polite composure of a man who looked like he belonged exactly where he stood. "Mind showing some ID?" the officer asked. McNair laughed lightly, not too forced, just enough. "Wish I could, but I left my wallet back at the house. You know how it is." That moment hung in the air, a single second, a fragile thread that could snap either direction. But the officer relaxed. Something about McNair's confidence dissolved his suspicion. "Just checking," the officer said finally. "Lot of folks passing through lately." McNair nodded politely. "Appreciate you stopping." The cruiser pulled away. And the moment it did, McNair's face shifted, not into relief, but determination. He knew the officer would learn the truth soon. The radio would buzz, a photo would appear, and the realization would hit him like cold water. He had spoken to the escaped inmate. But by then, McNair would be gone. Back at the prison, the investigation dug deeper into how such an escape could even occur. Guards were questioned for hours. Supervisors were grilled about oversight. And the more the FBI pieced together, the clearer it became. The failure wasn't a single mistake. It was dozens. A guard distracted during inspection. Another rushing paperwork. A camera with a blind spot. A shift supervisor who trusted routine more than precaution. Each mistake alone was harmless. Together, they formed a ladder. One McNair had climbed step by step. The warden's office was tense, filled with maps, schedules, and notes pinned across multiple whiteboards. Every investigator agreed on one thing. McNair's escape wasn't impulsive. It was engineered, crafted with patience and discipline. He hadn't relied on luck. He had relied on their habits. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, a trucker spotted a man hitchhiking along a rural road. The hitchhiker wore dusty clothes, but carried himself with confidence. The trucker slowed, considering him. But something about the man's eyes struck a strange chord. Intelligent, alert, evaluating the truck before the trucker even decided whether to stop. So the trucker didn't. He kept driving. The man on the R08 watched the truck fade into the distance. Then he turned, adjusting his route. He was careful never to leave footprints in obvious trails. He avoided gas stations with cameras. He never passed through towns twice. McNair knew the country inside and out, and he knew it wasn't just about hiding from authorities. It was about making sure he never formed a pattern they could track. Back at the prison, the notebook found in the workshop was examined page by page. Dates, times, notes on guard behavior, even crude sketches of the mail pallets. But something near the end stood out. A final line written in tighter handwriting, almost pressed into the page. They watch everything except what they trust. It wasn't a taunt. It wasn't a message. It was a principle. a principle he had used to slip through the walls of a place designed to hold the most dangerous inmates in the country. But investigators weren't finished. In the hours that followed, another discovery surfaced, one that suggested McNair's escape plan might have been only the beginning. The workshop supervisor found a pair of gloves tucked behind a ventilation system. Inside one glove was a folded scrap of paper containing coordinates. Remote coordinates. Nowhere near the prison. Nowhere near his escape route. It raised a chilling question. Had he practiced escaping long before the real escape? The coordinates led to a location the FBI had never expected. And once they arrived, what they found changed the entire course of the manhunt. The coordinates led the FBI to a quiet patch of land just outside the state line. A half-overgrown service road with a single abandoned structure. A weather-beaten storage shed surrounded by tall grass. Nothing about it seemed remarkable at first. The door hung crooked. The windows were boarded. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But when agents approached, something felt wrong. There were footprints in the dirt, fresh ones. A set leading in, a set leading out, and then nothing. As if the person vanished into the landscape the emotom meant they walked away. The agents opened the door cautiously, expecting a hiding spot or a stash of supplies. What they found instead was even more unsettling. Inside the shed sat a small folding table, and on top of it, a neatly stacked pile of newspapers clipped with plastic ties. Every newspaper was dated months before the escape, and in each one, a single article had been carefully highlighted. Stories about fugitives, manhunts, and criminal investigations where the suspect evaded capture for weeks or months. McNair hadn't just studied the prison. He had studied the people who hunted men like him. On the back wall, pinned with a rusty nail, hung a state map. Circles marked specific towns, but all of them had something in common. Each one was large enough to blend into, but small enough to avoid heavy surveillance. Small pharmacies, rural motels, bus stops that didn't use digital cameras, locations he might use as temporary rest points, places where he could change clothes, or simply locations that offered anonymity. This wasn't a hideout. It was a rehearsal room. The agents looked around the shed slowly, absorbing what the space meant. McNair had used this place to practice, to visualize his escape, to test timing, to understand routes, to plan the rhythm of disappearing. It explained everything, how he moved with such confidence the moment he stepped outside the prison perimeter. He wasn't improvising. He was executing a rehearsed performance. Back at FBI headquarters, pressure mounted from every side. The public wanted answers. Reporters demanded explanations. The warden's job was on the line. But the manhunt stretched across multiple counties now, and McNair had seemingly vanished into the cracks of the country. Agents began receiving sporadic sightings. A man who matched his description buying water at a gas station. Someone who looked like him slipping through the woods behind a farm. A stranger seen walking along a dirt road with a backpack slung over his shoulder. Each sighting raised hope, until units arrived too late. Still, every report revealed something. He never stayed long. He never left belongings behind. He never took unnecessary risks. And most importantly, he avoided anything digital. No credit cards, no online trails, no phone usage. He lived moment to moment, adapting with a fluidity authorities weren't used to encountering. But even the sharpest fugitives make a mistake eventually. 2 months into the escape, in a quiet town hundreds of miles from the prison, a man stopped at a small car dealership. He said he was passing through. He said he was looking for a used truck, something reliable. He talked with a salesman for 20 minutes. Friendly, calm, polite. Before he left, the salesman offered him a bottle of water. When the man turned to reach for it, the salesman noticed something unusual, a faint scar across his cheek. The salesman had seen that face somewhere before, not long ago, on a TV newscast, a wanted bulletin. He didn't react, didn't call attention to it. Instead, he nodded politely, wished the man a safe trip, and waited until the stranger was far down the road before dialing the police. That call set off a chain reaction. Units swept in. Roadblocks were formed. Officers strategically placed themselves along potential escape routes. And for the first time since the manhunt began, investigators had something real, a direction, a window of time, a pulse. Near dusk, a patrol officer spotted a man matching McNair's description, cutting through a field behind an industrial area. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He walked with the same relaxed confidence he had shown during the first police encounter. But this time, the officer didn't let it pass. Backup arrived quickly. Flashlights cut across the field. Dogs barked in the distance. The trapped man paused, standing in the fading orange light. He didn't raise his hands immediately. Not out of defiance, but almost out of disbelief that his long run had finally tightened into a corner. When officers surrounded him, he exhaled slowly, a long, calm breath. "It was a good run," he said quietly. No theatrics, no sudden movements, just acceptance. Authorities secured him without incident, and just like that, the escape that had embarrassed federal agencies, disrupted states, and captivated the country came to an end. But the aftermath told an even deeper story. Inside the prison, policies changed. Inspections grew stricter. New procedures were put in place to prevent similar escapes. The workshop area, once bustling with predictable patterns, became one of the most tightly regulated spaces in the facility. Investigators later described McNair as a man who understood the system better than the people who built it. He wasn't the strongest inmate. He wasn't the most aggressive. But he had something else: patience, intelligence, and the ability to see opportunity where others saw routine. In interviews after his recapture, officers admitted something they rarely say out loud. He didn't escape because our walls were weak. He escaped because he noticed what we didn't. His story remains one of the most fascinating and embarrassing chapters in American prison history. A reminder that sometimes, the most dangerous person isn't the one who fights the system, but the one who studies it quietly until the perfect moment comes. If you think this escape was unbelievable, wait until you hear what happened in the next case. Trust me, you're going to want to hit subscribe, because the next story is even darker, even stranger, and absolutely real.